We have heard so much about the scientific side of things, and all that is great, but we still have variety of stages of illness journey we are on, and we still have to cope with life. And I just wanted to focus a bit on the mental health aspects of having a chronic illness, and especially then giving some generic tools for coping. Okay. So the outline of the talk is, first of all, what is mental health? Because it's a term used quite a lot. I just wanted to be clear about what it really entails. And what's the difference between anxiety, stress, and a mental illness? Want to spend a bit of time talking about grief reaction. Some of you might already know about it. And then, the most important bit is some tips that I think would be helpful. And it would be good for me to actually find out from you all what are things that maybe have worked for you, and we should be thinking of adding that on. Okay, so first of all, what is mental health? So mental health basically is a term. It means it includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. So it's not just limited to just psychological, because that's what most people would think. But it includes our overall well-being. And our mental health is what determines how we think, how we feel, and in response to all that, how we behave, how we act. It's the main thing that will determine how we cope with when there are stressful events in our life, how we relate to others, as in other human beings, and relate to situations, and then how we make our choices. So some distinction between stress and mental illness. Quite often it's bandied about. I don't know if you have heard, people would say, politicians would say 1 in 3 people or 1 in 4 people have some mental health problems. I'm a psychiatrist, so I'm a medical doctor who specializes in diagnosing and treating mental illnesses. Now, mental illness is sort of you could say it on a spectrum, it's the extreme end. While stress is something that most humans, most mammals, most animals, and even plants, they go through. So that's basically for humans, it's our response, our body's response to pressure situations. And it is triggered when we are experiencing something that is threatening our existence, essentially. And it's usually in response to things which are not within our control. Now, what is the importance is that this chronic stress can lead to development of mental health problems. But stress in itself is pretty normal. Anxiety is pretty normal. And I would like to give the example of, you would have seen nature documentaries, and you would have seen a tiger, a leopard, going after a herd of deer or, some prey. And suddenly all the deer, they are in this heightened sense of emotional arousal, and they would be running. And then finally the tiger captures one deer. And what does the rest of the herd do? After a few seconds, minute or two, they actually get back to grazing as if nothing has happened. So stress and anxiety is normal when there is danger. But once that that stressor is removed, usually the anxiety levels, the stress should come down. But it becomes a problem, a pathology, if that organism continues to remain in that state of heightened arousal even when the danger is away. And that then can potentially lead to mental illnesses. So mental illnesses are basically medical conditions, they are diagnosable, and in a lot of cases self-help might be sufficient. But what I would urge people to be aware of is sometimes that's not enough, and that's when you need specialist help. So you could go to a GP or get some counseling or psychotherapy, or maybe even need to see a psychiatrist. And there's a bit of a spelling mistake, sorry. I want to spend some time on grief reaction. Now, this was developed by a person called Kubler-Ross, a Swiss person, and she came up with 5 stages, and that was later modified. 2 more stages were added, and it became a 7-stage model. And it was actually developed for bereavement, when we have a loss of someone dying. But really we recognize that grief reaction can happen for a variety of things. So I'm gonna just show you. So the last stage actually in the 5, that's acceptance, not anger. So this is the Kubler-Ross change curve model. And quite usually, so when we get a diagnosis of AMN or ALD or any form of leukodystrophy, which is a life-transforming kind of a diagnosis, people do go through these stages. And I think it's important that we recognize, I don't know if you can see the words properly, but the first one is denial. The initial reaction usually is denial or disbelief, and quite often leads to period of anger. And then comes the stage of bargaining, then depression, and then acceptance. I'll show you the next one. So they added in 2 more stages to make it a bit more the last 2 steps will make a bit more sense. So start with shock and denial. So that's when you refuse to, when the rational mind initially refuses to accept the diagnosis. And then comes the pain, and quite often guilt, where you think, oh, it's my fault. And I know there are quite a number of female attendees, and I know my mom, she carries a lot of guilt, that even though she herself has symptoms, but she feels she carries a lot of guilt for having passed it on to me as if it was her choice. And then comes anger and bargaining that goes on, and then a period of feeling very, very low, and just maybe resigned to it. And then between the stage of depression and the stage of acceptance, 2 were added, where the upward turn, which is basically resolution, gradual resolution, and reconstruction, as in trying to make sense of things. And finally comes acceptance, and with acceptance automatically will come hope. May I just have a quick show of hands? How many of you knew something about this, these stages of grief? Quite a number of people, okay. And did you apply it to your own stages, or did you know of grief as something? Okay, so I'm preaching to the converted, but it's always it's worth doing a revision of this. So this is quite normal, having this. So it's very okay. First of all, remind yourself it's okay to feel all these stages, especially the starting ones, the anger, the fear, the despondence, And this question of, I don't know how that happened. Why me is a question that I quite often hear from a lot of my patients who have some other forms of physical health, chronic health conditions. It's okay to feel that way. And having guilt, experiencing guilt and all is common, and I would say it is a normal response, but a normal initial response. If somebody is stuck in that stage, then certainly some help would be useful. So important thing is, don't be stuck at any of these stages, and think of ways of getting out of these feelings. And I think a powerful way is to work on, and it's a work, it's not something that will come spontaneously to most of us. And it might require, when you're faced with some really dire illnesses, it can be very hard on identifying positives, but it can be done. So my final slide is about, this generic formula I wanted to talk about for better mental well-being. And I think I might have spoken to some of you already about these things that are generally applicable. First and foremost, diet. Very important to have a healthy, balanced diet, because you might have heard of these hormones, chemicals, neurochemicals called dopamine, noradrenaline, serotonin. These are essentially, they require, the building blocks of these are essentially proteins, vitamins and all. So having a good diet is very important. There is a big pandemic going on, and it's not COVID. It's a pandemic which has been going on for quite a number of years before COVID, and that's the lack of sleep that most humans are actually gaining. And that's because of the artificial sun that we created over a century ago, the electric bulb, which means on average around the world, people are sleeping over an hour or something like that, an hour and a half less than what our ancestors used to. And our bodies and mind require that time to recover. And when somebody has a chronic illness, a physical illness, which also, and we don't know enough about the mental health impact of leukodystrophies, but our recovery time is much greater. And I know it, and I'm sure you all know it. If you get an infection of something, it probably takes you a lot longer to recover. So sleep's very important. Adequate amount is very important. So the research shows that 6 hours is sort of the minimum that is required. And it's very important to get it at the right time. So we are diurnal animals. We are not nocturnal. So our body clock is set up in a way where we need to get adequate amount of sleep between the hours of 11 p.m. and 4 p.m. It's important we get some hours in that time frame. And then is exercise. And I know it personally, how difficult, how challenging it is. But a spot of exercise, I'm forgetting the name of the doctor. She was somebody in Department of Health, and she said that if there is one magic bullet for all kinds of physical and mental health problems, it is exercise, and that is true. So much of research has gone into it, and we know that exercise alone, for example, can be adequate treatment for mild depression. And in moderate and severe depression, exercise, when done with other things like medicines or talking therapies, it's highly recommended. And I think it's no different for our condition. And there is a dose actually for exercise. Some of you, I'm sure, would know. So Department of Health says 150 minutes of exercise per week, done in 4 to 5 sessions, so 30 minutes. And that's for moderate intensity. If you are into doing something more vigorous or high intensity, then you require much less time. Something which is quite culturally accepted in the UK and a lot of countries. I come from India, there also. Alcohol is very much part of socializing, but using it as your coping mechanism for dealing with stress, or turning off your mind from all the worries, that's a bad idea, especially from a mental health point of view. We have Dr. Lackman here who might be able to say something about what it does to the physical progression. Maybe nothing, I don't know, but it certainly does impact on our long-term ability to cope. Means ethyl alcohol is a drug that works on the central nervous system and is a very well-known, a very potent depressant. So it eventually does depress the central nervous system. It depresses our memories, and that's why humans use it, because then we forget all our worries. And it can give you a sense temporarily that you're able to cope with anxieties better, but actually in the long term it's not a helpful strategy. Then the next point was finding strategies of managing stress in whatever way, and these are some of the suggestions. It's not an exhaustive list by any means. Socializing has been shown. Again, these are, I'm not telling things which we have, actually, most of these things would come across as common sense and something which have been passed on to us by our elders from many generations. But these, now I have put them here because there is robust scientific evidence that socializing, I live in Scotland, so the word they use is, a wee nice blether, a gossip session, nothing meaningful. You don't need to solve the world problems, the climate control, or stop the Ukraine war or anything. Just meeting people and just having a chat has been found to be to actually prolong longevity. And then hobbies, any hobby, something that really uplifts your mood, distracts your mind. Then a bit of altruism or charity, because we are so busy in our lives. But if we can get small, somebody yesterday mentioned this phrase, random acts of kindness. And it's that, you don't have to start volunteering at the food bank or soup kitchen, but something small. But when we do something which is not for ourselves, it's been shown to release certain feel-good chemicals in our brain. Reading, and I think I should have written writing as well, so writing a journal, but bibliotherapy, it's called, reading any kinds of books, ideally wholesome and uplifting books. It can be very helpful. And meditation, again, this is something, it's becoming very mainstream and popular. People know this, But I wanted to highlight that a lot of proper, well-conducted scientific studies have been done, which do show that ability to cope with the symptoms of chronic illnesses improves. The quality of life is much better in people who do some form of meditation on a regular basis. And again, there is a certain dose. All you require on a regular basis is anything upward of 10 to 15 minutes per day, and that's it. And again, the final point, scientifically proven that people who have some form of religious or spiritual belief, any kind, need not be any particular religion. Well, we have people sharing good news with everyone with us. But yeah, any kind of religious or spiritual belief, people tend to have better outcomes when it comes to dealing with chronic illnesses. And I'm not talking just leukodystrophies, but any. So that's my generic formula, and I think I'm well within my time. Questions at the end. Thank you, everyone.